The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. We are joined once again by Ben Jurek, top 3 in the ITC, among the latest and greatest in the hot new competitive players in Warhammer. He's going to LVO this coming week, and he has a real shot at winning the entire thing and bringing down the ITC along with it if the stars align. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Nick. I have a busy week ahead of me, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I so appreciate you taking the time out of this very busy week where I'm sure you're trying to prepare for LVO to come onto this podcast. The guests are super eager to hear about this one and learn exactly how you're preparing for such a major tournament.
You'd be surprised how little prepared I am, but how well prepared I am also. It's kind of a weird mix between teams and singles.
Yeah, well, that's actually what exactly we're trying to uncover in this episode. So we're going to talk about what your preparation has looked like. I know you're avidly participating on Team America to try to qualify for the actual starting position on that team, and then what that looks like for you and how that impacts your singles performance as an ITC competitor trying to potentially chase that number 1 spot. And, playing a team army might not be what's best for your singles performance, and how you kind of weigh those two factors and your actual playing of games and analyzing of lists and the meta and all that stuff. So we're going to unpack that in part 1 of this 2-part conversation, folks. And then in part 2, which you can catch on AOW40k.com, that is our Patreon. You can subscribe. You'll get access to this part 2 along with the other 224 episodes of Art of War. You'll get access to all of that, all the part 2s, all the good stuff. In that episode, Ben and I are going to talk about the actual list he's taking, breaking it down on a more tactical and strategic level, how he's piloting it, who he's worried about, and how he's going to compensate. So, Ben, without further ado, why don't you tell me about how you're preparing for LVO and what your lead up to that has looked like?
So my lead up has been, for the most part, taking it easy. I have not done the grinding that I would typically be doing. That falls a little bit on me, a little bit on scheduling, and a little bit on how my other 40K experiences this month. So my Eldar list, I don't have a ton of reps in, but I also do at the same time. I have 100 plus Eldar reps, many with this style of list, but not too many with the list I'm bringing. And I plan on putting it on the table a few times this week. Have a game after this cast, but it's not as much of a grind as you think it would be, because the meta hasn't evolved too much outside like Necrons emerging. So what I expect to go into, when I expect to play, hasn't changed too much from like when I was playing in November.
So you've been dominating pretty much the entire second half of the season once 10th edition is launched with Eldar, and that was a pretty sharp contrast to your performance with Majority Orcs last year. And you were doing really well. We actually brought you on the podcast shortly after WTC in 2023, talk about your super awesome successes, your major tournament wins, and things of that nature. But since then, Ben, the meta has kind of caught up a little bit. Other armies have started to adapt to the Eldar Menace. The Eldar Menace has been getting nerfed here and there. And, it's not the brutality powerhouse that it was upon day 1 of 10th edition. And to reflect that, it's been harder and harder to get really high placings and first places with Eldar. How's that been for you?
I have had success like post-slate. But it's definitely a much harder world. There's no more blowouts. There's no more 15-minute games that are happening. There's a lot of games you really should win on like a meta and matchup standpoint. But there are like some matchups that you just straight up lost if you didn't bring the tools. And my list kind of reflects that. Like I got really tired of losing the 90 Accursed Cultists, so I compensated and I've made up for that. I didn't approach WCW the way I should have, and I had a very bad performance there. And I took it more like a vacation than an actual like weekend of something I should have prepped for. Of the the sharkiest Shark Tank that ever existed. So after that humbling experience, I went back to the drawing board and was like, okay, we're going to stick to our guns. Play what we know, play good 40K, and just tighten up my play and learn what's actually going to beat me, because I didn't take some of the like opponents as seriously as I should have. I didn't take the CSM match as seriously as I should have, stuff like that. So I believe in my adjustments I've made for LVO. I should be going fine, but like there's also a new menace on the horizon, which is Necrons.
So there's a lot of factors to unpacking that. part of that is kind of your mentality going into WCW and the tournaments surrounding that, where maybe you didn't take it as seriously, you were invited to be there, that was good enough for you, whatever your reasons may have been. It led to your performance being, by your own standards, perhaps a little lackluster, but nonetheless, you've come back stronger, you've come back better. What does that actually look like? How do you dissect the meta from one event to another? The only new factor is Necrons, as you said, and they're relatively new and kind of hard to pin down at the moment. So how do you adjust your army and adjust your play? And with respect that we're going to mostly be getting to a tactical and strategic level in part 2 of the conversation, but how do you even view the tournament and the meta and preparing in general?
Well, you have to really know, like, you have to build your meta knowledge. And most of my losses in 40K in general, no matter what I'm playing, doesn't matter what I'm actually piloting, usually come from something where I didn't know what something did, didn't know the damage it did, didn't know the secret sauce, didn't know the synergies. So the first thing I do when I walk up to a table, especially with an army that's relatively uninteractive like Eldar, is I really want to know what their army does and know all the really cheeky secrets, know all the things, know all the quote unquote gotchas. Because if I'm going to lose, it's likely to that.
Right. So you're trying basically to avoid any gotchas and beyond the sportsmanship level of it, just, make sure you got a handle on the situation so you can control it, since it's very much the Eldari play style. Just kind of knowing the threat ranges, keeping your army at safe distances and not taking any unnecessary risks or unnecessary damage. So just kind of be more aware of the game and the things within it is your big take.
Yeah, gathering awareness of the game, putting some reps on the table, seeing what damage output looks like. Like, what happens if that 5-man chosen brick actually connects? What happens if Sisters, connects with that group of Echoes? Like, where are my danger points? Where are my pinch points? Where are the things where I can, disregard that as a threat, or where are the threats you should take seriously? Because threat assessment, I think, especially with how shaved down Eldar lists are now, is probably one of the most important things you need, one of the most important skills you can have.
Threat assessment, is that pretty much like the same as target priority in your mind? Like, shoot this thing, then that thing, then this thing? How do you identify threat assessment and do something about it?
Threat assessment has a couple different stages. Like, is this an immediate threat? Is this a threat in the late game? Is this a threat that needs to get screened? It's how much are you going to respect that threat? Because there are some things like, if it connects with my Brick or Wraith Guard, cool, 1 CP, back up, shoot, and they're not going to do a lot of damage. But there's also some threats where I never want them to connect. So those are where you make your really crucial game-breaking plays. Like, am I going to make an aggressive Phantasm, or do I need to Phantasm away? Stuff like that. And sometimes it lines up with target priority, and other times it just lines up with I need to, that's the thing that's eating the slow, and then I need target priority or all these trash units that are scoring. Because you're not always just shooting what the threat is, you're also sometimes just denying their ability to score.
Right, and it's kind of that two balance factor here. What is trying to kill you, what is threatening from a damage perspective, and what is scoring their points really well and effectively for them. And then how do you, as a player, determine should you attack their scoring elements and make it a scoring-based game where you're just running around outscoring them, or just make it a damage-based game where you try to kill them first and then the rest of it falls into place? That's kind of a board state and reactive situation. Like, going into it, top of one, I'm relatively reserved unless I'm fed something that's just too juicy. And I want to see if they're going to push on me super hard, I'm just going to dump all my damage into them. But if they're going to play reserve too, that's when I need to start doing my scoring math. I'm just like, okay, when can I throw them on 5 on a primary? Can I set up this ingress? Do I need to set up this overwatch? Do I let him get 10s for 3 turns? What is this game going to look like? Is this going to be a 90-80 game, or is this going to be a blowout? The game starts developing, and you start weighing out what it's going to look like, and you start doing your assessment, your math, and you're like, okay, as long as this plans out like this game will finish, and I'm still going to win by 6. And then there are other scenarios where if your push happens or you take a risk, you can of course go higher. But I kind of base that reactive to how my opponent is going to play their turns. So it's really hard to kind of make those calls in 10th edition and play that very calculated game. Eldar like to play that more than any other faction, I find, because they have the ability to really control movement and just dominate that scoring section of the table. However, in 10th edition especially, we have things that are just random. Your tactical cards are exactly that. And then battle shocks can ruin your day. All kinds of things can just happen in Warhammer these days. So how do you plan to that level of degree? Let's say your opponent doesn't just throw his army at you and then you apply the damage and see what happens. How do you play that scoring protracted game?
First off, I'm gonna give the nod to Eldar that they get to cheat through a lot of that and just fate dice when they need to pass battle shocks and stuff like that. So they have an unlimited pool of being able to secure points essentially.
How could I forget? Eldar just don't care about rules.
So I'm going to give the little nod to the broken rule index for a second. But outside that, the cards do add a level of unpredictability, but we're at the stage in the game, the amount of reps, especially among higher level players, where you're weighing out the cards. You're doing the thing where you're walking off objectives, knowing your opponent could draw Storm Hostile. You know what cards are remaining in the deck. Like deck tracking is a skill that you definitely should have in this edition. And in the early portions of it, there's always way more probability, but like down to turn 4, turn 5, especially after like a discard or two, you're like, okay, you have, 4 or 5 cards left. Here's what my possibilities are. And those turn 4, turn 5 plays you can make can really shift the game because you can just end up denying your opponent a sick amount of secondaries.
So when you say deck counting and things like that, are you talking about being aware of the cards in your deck or that still remain, or your opponent's deck that still remain, or both?
Both.
How do you impact both of those? Because they're so variable. Even on turn 4, there's still potentially 8 cards left in your deck, 8 cards left in your opponent's deck. It's so hard to make any sort of accurate assessment there.
There's you kind of always weigh out the ones that you can affect, and then you also go with the ones that you're okay with scoring. Your opponent scoring, like, okay, my opponent. I'm in a scenario where if my opponent draws Cleanse next turn, he would need to do X, Y, Z. And then he likely can secure a 2, and with risk can secure a 5. But there's also ones that are just like easy to deny. Like denying 3 corners of Investigate is really easy for Eldar. So like if your Investigate is still in your opponent's deck, you're still denying Investigate. Especially if they had the ability to score it as well. If they're a slow army that can't quite get there, you're like, cool, I don't need to care about Investigate. I know they can't score it, and you just don't regard them drawing it at all. So you also have to conclude those things. I'm just like, what's actually scoreable by my opponent, and can I deny it?
So this kind of goes into your philosophy and approach for getting ready for LVO, which is really just be very, very good at Warhammer. And I think that goes a little bit unsaid, and it might sound a little silly to say that the person trying to win LVO needs to be very good at Warhammer, but you're focusing more on your fundamentals, it sounds like, deck counting or general unit positioning and flows of the game, as opposed to list micromanagement and things of that nature, which I find really fascinating because it kind of ties into how you've been preparing for your overall year with WTC in respect to that. So there's a lot of different factors here. Ben, you're on Team America trying to compete there, and then you're also this fantastic singles player who's trying to win the ITC. Chasing both of those at the same time can have a lot of conflict. Are you playing Eldar for your WTC team right now?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Why would you be? So how is that, like on a front surface level, playing one army for the teams and one army totally different for singles?
It's a little bit different, but I also, coming from a Magic background, I've always believed you need to play the other decks to know them well. So in this scenario, I get to play the other decks. In this particular request, our captain and co-captains have asked that we really buckle down and focus on 2 to 3 factions this year. So I've been faction selected on Orcs and Guard. So that's where all my reps related to teams have gone 100% whatsoever. So any game you see me playing for Team America, I'm playing one of those 2 armies. So that's what I've been grinding. It's still 40K. You still have your fundamentals down. Reflecting back on the Eldar list, I know that list can win a major. That's not an issue. I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to sweat it. I just made like a one big change so I don't insta lose to like 90 cultists. But outside that, I haven't touched the list. The list is very cookie cutter Eldar. There's nothing special I need to change. No micromanaging need to be done. If you're just a better player, you're likely going to win most of your games.
Right. And you mean you don't necessarily translate being a better player at that list in terms of you have to know where to put the incarn or when to go in with that, or where to put your units, when to phantasm, when to fire and fade. You have a lot of Eldar reps, so you're kind of drawing on that muscle memory from a few months ago. And if you have really sharp, just general 40K strategy skills, that kind of stuff, then you should be able to apply moving more in Eldar rules to a 40K skilled mindset. Is that the idea?
That's kind of the idea. It is conflict. Like in a perfect world where I have, I don't have a full-time job, I would be putting more Eldar reps in. Let's not get beyond ourselves kidding here. I would be putting way more Eldar reps in with the intention of winning LVO and the ITC, but that's just not the world I live in. But I am more prepared for this LVO. I am a better player than I've ever been. And anything short of top cut or winning LVO is a loss.
And that is some confidence in your own powers over there. I'm here for you, Ben. Good luck to that.
I used to be, for most of the year, I took the humble, yeah, it'd be cool if I won approach. And I've had more than a few people tell me to cut that shit out. So here we are. We're here to win it. Anything short of winning, is not what we're here to do. So.
Well, I love the go get 'em attitude. If you don't believe in yourself, literally no one else will. So that is awesome, and I'm here for it. So with teams, there's this conflict not only about the factions, and I can talk about that for days, but there's also the element of scoring. Before we get into that, though, I'm still stuck on factions, Ben. You're playing Guard and Orcs. I couldn't think of two more polar opposite factions right off the get-go. One is shooting you with tanks, and the other is running at you and punching you in the face. And, those two are opposite enough. And then both of them play super different from Eldar in their own respects. So how are you juggling this triangle of factions here?
I don't find playstyle migration to be that difficult. There's sometimes you catch yourself playing like the other style, but I also believe that opens up opportunities in other play lines you wouldn't see. For example, with my guard list, I am, moving up and wrapping and trapping rhinos full of chaos stuff with my Casterkin. That's not the general play style of guard. So there's, I'm moving my artillery pieces to, get line of sight and do, and gain better tactical objective positions and stuff like that. Not a lot of guard players move, their artillery around too much. So there's lines of play that you pick up and see that are just like more general Warhammer sense that, you may not apply to XYZ army. Now, being a guard player doesn't exactly make me a better orc player. Let me be fair with that. Some skill just doesn't translate. But I don't find the playstyle shift that different when the main objectives of Warhammer never really change that much.
While that's definitely true, and I can see your point to you can wrap a rhino with the orcs, you can wrap a rhino with guardsmen, same idea. Tactics are tactics, Warhammer is Warhammer. There's definitely I called it kind of an intuition that I found with Warhammer, where it's myself, I prescribe myself as a defensive, reactive type of person. And when I'm playing an army that I know naturally plays very aggressively, say Chaos Space Marines as an example, I find myself uncertain and unsure-footed when I am playing that faction, no matter how many reps I have, no matter if I've been there before or not. It's just kind of a natural divide. And this may be unique to me specifically, but do you experience anything like that, Ben, or do you just know what you're doing with it?
Every time I have played a game of Eldar, I've always had to kind of remind myself that I'm playing Eldar. That this is not a resource trading army. That there's those little checks because you have your autopilot, you have your muscle memory, and you have to. I kind of talk to myself a little bit, in my own head, not out loud that too often, where I'm just like, okay, what is the correct elf play here? Because there's other plays I would make if these were entirely different units. But you do have to shake a little bit of muscle memory. But you're only making a mistake if you commit to a bad decision. And you're running through all your lines of play. You're looking okay, what if I did this? What if I do this? What's this line option? What's this look like? And overall, I enjoy being a more aggressive board control player. If I'm fed a board I can be aggressive on with Eldar, I absolutely will. It doesn't mean I can't be the passive, gonna stand there and not interact with you and score a bunch of points style of army.
Right. There's definitely knowing when to do each style. And I love that you said playing Eldar is super different to playing Orcs, and you have to go through that kind of mental checklist to remember that you're playing a different style army, and they can't just resource trade like that. They have to take, not trade, as we like to say. So with that in mind, are you concerned at all about even having to make that mental checklist every single game? Part of LVO's difficulty is that it is a marathon, especially if you have to go through the shadow round, you're playing till midnight, then you're playing 3 games in top 8. It can be a 10-round tournament across 4 days. It is literally lots of Warhammer, and that gets increasingly difficult. If you have to make those mental strains on yourself turn after turn after turn, game after game after game, it can be very, very difficult, especially if you're not putting in a massive amount of reps to autopilot as much as you can before the event.
Yeah, I definitely see the line where you're more open to mistakes when it comes to being drowsy, when it comes to not thinking correctly. Like we've all seen people make incredible tiny mistakes, and I make plenty of them. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not a perfect player. And those tiny mistakes are those games where I, lose by 7, lose by 5, lose by 6, because like you get a 10-point flip out of something so minute, especially at the top tables. I specifically believe that my endurance game is better than 99% of the players out there, and that's part of what will help me win LVO.
I mean, that's if it's your strength, even better.
I'm the home. I have home field advantage. This is my house.
That's true. You live in Vegas. I completely forgot about that.
So like they're doing the Vegas vacation thing. They're on
I always
zone.
Yeah, I go to Vegas. I party it up. My throat's super sore. I'm not used to that desert. Yeah,
no, I'm going home, sleeping in my own bed. Petting my own cats, kissing my own wife. I have all the comfort in the world. I have a health and fitness coach on Team USA that has gotten us all jazzed up on the yoga exercises we need to be doing, and the food we should be eating, and the supplements we should be taking to be playing tabletop. Like I'm prepared, and I'm probably going to be more prepared than most people. And that obviously, the more prepared you are, the more likely you are to win.
It's interesting that you consider yourself highly prepared without having played your faction much leading up to the event. Most people would be grinding their faction day in, day out, trying to get those reps in if they're trying to compete at your level. But you're just on your almost like general self-improvement with the health and all that. You're in your element and your comfortability in Vegas, and you've been just playing really tight, good competitive 40K with a variety of factions that can actually broaden your horizons here. So by that respect, you are really, really in shape with this. Obviously, you're going to vote for yourself if I tell you who do you think is going to win LVO, but who are you kind of concerned about aside from yourself?
My dream is a Sean Naden Ben Jurek final. And Sean is a better player than me, no matter what condition I'm in, no matter how many reps I have. That guy does not practice at all. Well, he doesn't practice nearly as much as other people, but he's an amazing player. So I want that finish. That's the piece de resistance I'm looking for, and of course I'd love to beat him there. Outside that, there's still a lot of talent going to LVO that I definitely never want to discount. I want to give a big shout out to all the West Coast XPZ guys. Those guys have gone from like local California fun team to like all those guys are becoming killers. And they're becoming, harder and harder to beat. And they've definitely taken games off me. A lot of my losses this year have come to members of XPZ. So I want to give those guys a shout out. Brad Chester's going to be there. A lot of the Euros aren't going to be there. Like Nassim and Manny are going to be there. But that just gives me the opportunity to win the ITC. So I'm going to, give them a little thank you for giving me a shot.
Yeah, you show up and you play the games right in front of you. That's all you can do.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, the games you are playing at LVO are singles games, and that's a win-loss format. Whether you win or lose is really the only thing that is checked to see whether or not you progress to the next round. And in some cases, draws will also eliminate you. So you really have to win a game by at least a point. And then on the flip side, most of your practice has been teams format. And in teams, the margin of victory it matters more than whether or not you've won or lost. Losing games can be fine if you keep it tight. And that can create a mindset of, how do I generally play a strategy that'll keep it tight safely, consistently, as opposed to win a game by one. It is a different mindset there. And similarly, like dealing with blowouts, some people in teams may be trying to blow you out, or your job is to go get a 20, which might not be the safest line to secure a nice, solid win by 1 or 2 or 3 kind of thing. And then, of course, there's the element of at really high-level competitive Warhammer. If you're both trying to barely win the game by just a couple points, any random dice roll could tilt it one way or the other. How do you deal with such a divergent scoring approach here?
So that's a lot to break down, to be honest. But I'll make it as quick as I can on that. The goal of teams, especially comes down to your pairing your matrix. And like if you put down a drawish situation, I'm perfectly fine playing drawish out for the most part. But you obviously have to take some risks, and risks that, like, let's say you had some dice didn't go your way, or you made a small mistake or here or there, and you're down by 15. Sometimes you want to lock in that that 7. You're like, okay, cool. We're not going to make any further. We're not going to make any risks, and we're just going to lock in the 7. In singles, you have to make the play and get your points back. So those are scenarios where you're definitely going to look for more risk. But there are other scenarios, like in Eldar's favorite matchups, where like you're expected to go out and get a 14. I'm perfectly fine getting it. I don't need to make plays. I can just do this. And you're in a situation where you take less risk. So there's, I think the biggest translation between teams and singles comes down to where am I willing to take risks and where am I not, and what's the safe play, what are the dangerous plays, and like what are the plays that go over the top. If I'm put into an unfavored match, I'm definitely going to try and edge out scenarios where I'm going to take a high risk, and I'm projected to lose, and I need to flip that. Like if I'm in a projected 8 on my matrix, I need to flip 15 points worth of gameplay to flip that differential to a win in singles. So you start looking at the board of like, okay, where can I find the 15 points? How am I going to get there? What's my path to victory? And it doesn't matter if you win by 1. So like you throw all that out the window, where if I switch back to teams mode, I had to go back to being really analytical about my point scoring and go, okay, I always want to be set up to score these secondaries or put my opponent in a denied situation where if I don't score that secondary, it doesn't matter. Or make as much differential as you can where you score and they don't. But that's not the perfect world. And there's a little bit less pressure on some of the singles games because like it's win or not. You don't have the pressure of having to overperform or have the pressure of anything else. You can just take the risk and go for it.
This translates a little bit further than necessarily decision points within the game. It could be pre-game as well. I'll just give you an example here. If you're playing against an army with a lot of characters, and say a sisters list as an example, and you could take Assassinate and deploy homers. Deploy homers is a free fixed secondary for just about anybody, and then Assassinate is up to a 20, depending on how many sisters characters you kill. The onus is on you to go kill those characters. And in teams, if your job is to go murder the sisters army, then go kill all the characters, get a big Assassinate score. In singles, though, it opens up the potential for your opponent to play very conservatively, deny you a ton of Assassinates, and eco in on you that way while not playing with their characters. Alternatively, you could go tactical, and at that point you're playing with the deck and whatever that draws are. How do you make those kinds of calls with your opponent being able to change their lines of play to potentially make your life harder as well?
I look at those lines of play, and specifically the fixed and the tactical decision, and you had to like play out a mini game in your head of just like, okay, what happens if they don't play with their characters? What happens if all those go sit in a immolator or a rhino over there? What am I looking at? Does that make my game easier? And am I just gonna roll over them for making that decision anyway? You have to play that little mini game in your head real quick and go, what if? And sometimes the what ifs are like, okay, I'm still gonna score 12 in it anyway, because I'm gonna night spinner that, incarn that, fight over there, like. You have to ask the question, does it matter? And often with Eldar, it doesn't. Broken Army. But you still want to weigh it out on like, okay, just like I said before, I only need to win by 1, while my opponent also only needs to win by 1. And if I'm getting in the characters, at top of 4 and I only kill 2 of them, I'm suddenly, I'm missing 12 of my secondary points. And where can I make that up if that did happen? Where with tactical, Eldar, once again, score pretty reliably. And sometimes you'd rather play the deck and go, am I going to miss 12 points in the tactical deck becomes the key question.
Right. It's a pretty complicated question to answer. And I imagine a lot of that falls onto personal preference and experience to a degree. Like, which way do you want to approach the game? And you yourself said you prefer to play a more aggressive style there. So would that lead you to take something more kill-oriented more often than not?
Yeah, I like kill-oriented secondaries if given to me. Eldar are relatively have a small amount of resources. So like anytime my stuff is locked up doing some sort of secondary that isn't like, that my swooping hawks can't do, or if they would trade for making that trade for doing that, that's when you really have to think about it. Because like, my swooping hawks coming in doing an action or doing a mission, cool, they scored points. Well, did they die afterward, or do I could use them again? So sometimes I have opportunities to just, take homers behind enemy lines and just fire and fade into people's fields and just shoot missiles of scoring. And that's my like bottom line guaranteed scoring of like, okay, I can just do this over and over again. It's very hard to prevent, and I can, here's my scoring floor. Or do I take tactical, and how many points do I miss on tactical? Or, you still have those options because like I'm not using my hawks to kill anybody. So I also have to go through that decision process.
So when you're playing Eldar, it's obviously different to Orcs and Guard, where if you draw a card, it's pretty much always worth it for you to sacrifice some idiot unit or some Gretchen or a truck or whatever to go do that action and commit suicide to score those points. With Eldar, you have fewer resources. They're all more valuable, and there's a lot of potential with each resource removed and opportunity costs. So if you take your Warp Spiders as an example and go sack them from behind enemy lines, or your Swooping Hawks or something like that, do you get to use that unit again? Probably not. And then how many times can you afford to do that before you're just out of units or your opponent has too much stuff over you as an advantage? And I suppose it's something you have to weigh as an Eldar player over and over again. What's your thought process there?
It comes down to like how I see the game plan going. Like if I see a sweeping engagement on an army that doesn't have a lot of board coverage, the behind enemy lines homers play is perfectly fine. You have lots of spots you can land, fire and fade onto, whichever, to score those, to enable those points. But like if I get put on corners, I'm gonna probably change my mind and go to something more tactical based. So the mission does come in mind, and the main primary comes in mind. There's honestly a lot to weigh, but I have a preference for most of it at this point. After 100 plus reps of where I want to go, and I still question myself if it's the right play sometimes. Like there are times I've taken fix where I'm like, I probably should have taken tactical, and there's times I've taken tactical where I'm like, fix was definitely the play here, but hindsight's 20/20.
Let's talk about the last elephant in the room. All of your team practice is on WTC terrain. For those of you unfamiliar, it's tons of ruins, lots of card configures, super dense boards. It's so hard to see anything, and moving is a pain. And LVO is player placed. There's a lot of fewer pieces, very specific spots they can go in, have to be 5 inches away from other ruins. Totally different skill set there in terms of terrain. What's your approach for navigating each of those?
Give my opponent as little as possible and give me the like 1 or 2 landing zones I actually need. Because at the end of the day, Wraithguard just need to phantasm through a wall, and I get to pick where in my deployment zone they get to do that. And everything else, as long as my opponent doesn't have the ability to hold more than 2 no man's lands objectives uncontested without me, being able to interact with it, I'm probably going to be fine. If there's a situation where that occurs, I need to figure out a way around it. Because like you can, with correct placement with some of these boards, my opponent can jam, 6 wraiths on one, 6 wraiths on another with Necrons, have good terrain on those 2 objectives, and I'm not going to shake them, and they might, be scoring 15s, and I can't allow that. So that's when my game plan needs to shift. I need to figure out, okay, I'm not just going to have a shooting gallery and be able to score all game. I actually need to interact with you. So there's definitely the first drop and who gets dropped 2, who drops 1 is pretty important. The set you're getting is important, but you don't really know any of that till you get to the table. And I've had plenty of player place, games throughout the year, and I will, have a few reps with it before LVO. But at the end of the day, I'm comfortable with Eldar and player placed. There's just a little bit of awkwardness for people that don't have experience with it, and I'm looking really forward to having some big shooting lanes for my Wraithguard pretty soon here.
Yeah, I'm sure. Eldar on player place terrain sounds absolutely brutal to me. Ben, I think you're in pretty good shape to take down this tournament, or at least put a big shot in for yourself. I don't know that anyone is likely to win LVO, but you're more likely than most. And I think that's as good as we can realistically hope here. I wish you the best of luck, and I'm super eager to continue this conversation in part 2, where we're going to actually break down your army list and how you plan to use it in a variety of different matchups and specifically against certain players. Hopefully, you can join us in part 2, listeners. We'd love to have you on AOW40k.com. That's our Patreon. It's $5 a month to join. You also get access to this part 2, all the other part 2s, and our Discord. You can catch Ben and I's conversation about his Eldar over there. Ben, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome, Nick. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Listeners, thank you for listening, and we will catch you later.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. The Art of War 40K.com.